The silence that followed King Kethran's death seemed to echo through the entire Vorthon flagship. News of the impossible event spread through the ship at light speed as surviving crew members witnessed the empty throne where their ancient ruler had sat for over 1,000 years. The empire that had conquered half the galaxy suddenly found itself without its immortal leader, Captain Park. Jiho received the distress signal from the Vorthon ship 3 hours later. His long-range sensors detected massive power fluctuations and system failures throughout the enemy flagship. The USS Incheon approached cautiously expecting a trap, but finding only a drifting vessel with most of its crew either dead or fled in escape pods. The rescue team that boarded the alien ship found corridors filled with the wreckage of advanced technology and the bodies of elite Vorthon warriors. They followed a path of destruction that led directly to the throne room, where they discovered something that would change their understanding of human potential forever. Tae-min sat quietly on the steps below the empty bone throne, his golden glow now dimmed to a soft radiance that made him look almost normal. Dr. Lee So-young stood nearby, taking readings with salvaged Vorthon equipment, trying to understand what had happened to her fellow human. When Captain Park entered the throne room, he barely recognized his subordinate. The Marine who had been captured during routine patrol was still there, but transformed into something that existed beyond normal human limitations. His eyes still held flecks of fire, and his presence seemed to bend reality around him. The medical examination that followed broke every known law of biology. Tae-min's cellular structure had reorganized itself using principles that Earth science hadn't discovered, yet his DNA contained patterns that shouldn't be stable, but somehow created a form of life that was more efficient than anything evolution had produced. Dr. Lee compiled her research into reports that were immediately classified at the highest levels. Her data suggested that extreme stress and near-death experiences could trigger dormant genetic sequences in certain humans. These sequences appeared to be evolutionary, safeguards that activated only when the species faced extinction-level threats. The implications were staggering. If Tae-min's transformation could be understood and replicated, humanity might be on the verge of an evolutionary leap that would place them among the most powerful species in the galaxy. But the process required surviving torture and death that would kill normal humans instantly. News of the Vorthon King's death traveled faster than official communications. Alien species across the galaxy heard whispers and rumors about a single human who had transcended death itself to destroy the most feared ruler in known space. The stories grew with each telling until Tae-min became a legend. The political ramifications began immediately. Species that had viewed humans as primitive newcomers suddenly started reconsidering their attitudes. Trade negotiations that had been stalled for years were reopened. Military alliances that had excluded Earth began sending diplomatic overtures a year. Vorthon Empire itself began to fragment without its immortal leader. Regional governors declared independence, while rival factions fought for control of the remaining fleet. Human colonies that had been under constant attack found themselves suddenly safe as Vorthon forces retreated to defend their own territory. Captain Park faced the difficult task of writing official reports about events that seemed impossible, even to those who had witnessed them. How do you explain to military command that one of their Marines had died and returned as something beyond human? How do you describe technology that stops working in the presence of transformed consciousness? Tae-min himself was struggling with his new existence. His enhanced senses allowed him to perceive reality in ways that no human had ever experienced. He could feel the quantum fluctuations that underlied all matter, and hear the electromagnetic songs of distant stars. But he was still fundamentally the same person who had joined the Marines to protect others. Dr. Lee continued her research aboard the USS Incheon, using data collected from the Vorthon ship. Her preliminary findings suggested that Tae-min's genetic modifications were stable and possibly inheritable. If he ever had children, they might carry the potential for similar transformations. The scientific community on Earth was divided between those who wanted to study Tae-min as a test subject and those who recognized that he had become something that demanded respect as a new form of life. His transformation represented a natural evolutionary step that couldn't be forced or replicated through artificial means. Earth Command faced strategic decisions that would determine humanity's future in galactic politics. Do they reveal the extent of Taemin's abilities and risk making Earth a target for other powerful species? Or do they keep the transformation secret and lose the diplomatic advantages it might provide? The answer came when other species began testing human resolve, thinking that the destruction of one Vorthon ship was merely luck. Several alien raiders attacked human merchant vessels expecting easy victories. Instead, they found themselves facing Marines who fought with impossible determination and showed remarkable resistance to weapons that should have been instantly lethal. Word spread through underworld networks that humans were different from other species in ways that weren't immediately obvious. Pirates and slavers who had previously targeted human settlements began looking for easier prey. The reputation for resilience that humanity had always possessed suddenly took on new and frightening dimensions. Taemin requested assignment to the most dangerous missions where his enhanced abilities could protect other humans from threats they couldn't handle alone. His presence on the battlefield became a psychological weapon as enemies who had heard the stories began to question whether any human might possess hidden capabilities. Dr. Lee established a research program to identify other humans who might carry the genetic markers for transformation. Her work was conducted in secret, with volunteers who understood that they might be participating in the next step of human evolution. The results were promising but also terrifying. The galaxy was adjusting to a new reality where humanity could no longer be dismissed as a minor species. The destruction of King Kethran had been more than just revenge. It had been a demonstration that humans possessed potential that other races had never suspected. Years passed and Taemin's legend grew. He became a symbol of human resilience and a warning to any species that might consider humans as prey. The transformation that had begun with torture and death had become the foundation for a new chapter in human expansion across the stars. The USS Incheon was retrofitted as a mobile research station, allowing Dr. Lee to continue her work, while Taemin carried out missions that required his unique abilities. Other humans began displaying enhanced healing and improved physical capabilities, suggesting that proximity to Taemin might be triggering latent genetic responses. Captain Park was promoted to admiral and given command of a new fleet designed to explore regions of space that had previously been too dangerous for human ships. With Taemin as their guardian, they could venture into territories controlled by hostile species and negotiate from a position of strength. The Vorthon Empire continued to decline as various successor states fought among themselves. None of them wanted to risk awakening another transformed human by attacking Earth colonies. The lesson of their dead king had been learned throughout their former territory. Dr. Lee published carefully edited versions of her research that revealed enough to establish human scientific credibility without exposing the full extent of what was possible. Her work earned her recognition as one of the foremost experts on evolutionary biology in the galaxy. Alien scientists began studying human genetics, looking for clues about what made the species capable of such dramatic transformations. Some hoped to replicate the process in their own people, while others wanted to understand how to prevent it from happening. The transformation of one Marine had changed everything. Humanity was no longer seen as just another species trying to find its place among the stars. They had become something that other civilizations watched with mixture of respect, fear, and curiosity. Taemin continued to evolve, his abilities growing stronger and more capable with each passing year. His existence proved that humans carried within them the potential to transcend normal biological limitations when pushed to their absolute breaking point. The galaxy would never again underestimate the species from the small blue planet in the outer rim. King Kethran's final mistake had revealed humanity's greatest secret, and the stars themselves had taken notice of what humanity might become when their true potential was unleashed. The doors to the throne room had been sealed with every security measure the Vorthons possessed. Energy barriers, quantum locks, and physical blast shields designed to withstand direct hits from battleship weapons. King Kethran sat on his bone throne, surrounded by his personal guard, the most elite warriors in the entire empire. But the defenses meant nothing to what Taemin had become. He placed his glowing hand against the blast door and the metal simply melted away. The energy barriers flickered and died as his transformed body disrupted the quantum fields that powered them. The locks designed to hold back armies opened with a soft click. Dr. Lee followed close behind him, watching in amazement as the impossible continued to happen. Her scientific mind was recording every detail of what she was witnessing. The way reality seemed to bend around Tae-min, the way technology failed in his presence, the way he moved as if the normal laws of physics were merely suggestions. The throne room had been turned into a fortress. The bone-covered floor was now hidden under weapon emplacements and defense systems. The walls bristled with energy cannons, and the air shimmered with protective fields. King Kethran had brought out every weapon in his personal armory. The ancient ruler looked different than before. The confident predator who had spent days torturing his prisoner was gone, replaced by something that might have been fear. His 6 eyes tracked Tae-min's movement, while his 4 hands gripped weapons that had conquered star systems. The first attack came from all directions at once. Energy beams, plasma bolts, gravity distortions, and quantum disruptors filled the air with deadly force. The combined firepower could have destroyed a small moon. But Tae-min walked through it like he was strolling through rain. The weapons fire that reached him was absorbed into his glowing form, making his golden aura burn brighter. The beams that missed him struck the walls and ceiling, leaving molten craters in the ancient metal. But he continued moving forward with steady, unhurried steps that somehow covered impossible distances. His personal guard were the finest warriors the Vorthan Empire had ever produced. Veterans of countless battles who had never known defeat. They wore armor forged from the cores of dead stars and carried weapons that could cut through the fabric of space itself, but they had never faced anything like what Tae-min had become. The first guard to reach him swung, a blade made from crystallized gravity that could slice through neutron star material. Tae-min caught the weapon with his bare hand, and the impossible metal shattered like glass. The guard stared at his broken weapon for a moment, before Tae-min's other hand struck him in the chest. The blow sent the massive alien flying across the throne room with enough force to crack the reinforced walls. His armor that had protected him through 100 battles was crushed inward, leaving a perfect handprint in the stellar metal. The guard hit the far wall and slid down, leaving a crater in the ancient bones. The second guard fired a weapon that manipulated time itself, creating pockets of accelerated entropy that aged anything they touched to dust in seconds. The beam struck Tae-min, but instead of aging him, it seemed to make him more vital, more alive. His golden glow pulsed with renewed energy. Dr. Lee watched from the doorway as Tae-min fought through the elite guards with movements that seemed to flow from one impossible action to the next. He moved like liquid mercury flowing around attacks that should have hit him, and striking back with precision that turned the aliens' own momentum against them. The third guard activated a personal shield generator that created a bubble of reversed spacetime around him, making him essentially untouchable by normal physics. Tae-min reached into the impossible geometry of the shield and pulled the alien out as easily as reaching into a pocket king. Kethran watched his finest warriors fall with growing horror. These guards had conquered galaxies and destroyed civilizations. They were legends among their own species warriors, whose names were spoken with reverence and fear. But they were falling, like children before this transformed human. The fourth guard tried to use a weapon that fired bullets made from compressed singularities. Each shot contained the mass of a small asteroid compressed into a point smaller than an atom. The projectiles hit Tae-min and simply vanished, absorbed into whatever impossible physics now governed his existence, with fluid grace that made the battle look like a deadly dance. Tae-min moved through the remaining guards. Their weapons and armor that represented the pinnacle of Vorthan technology were useless against someone who existed partially outside normal reality. The throne room filled with the sounds of breaking metal and alien screams. Dr. Lee noticed that despite his overwhelming power, Tae-min was fighting with restraint. He could have simply erased his opponents from existence, but instead he was using just enough force to disable them. It was as if some part of his humanity was still guiding his actions, even in his transformed state. The last guard fell, and suddenly the throne room was quiet, except for the crackling of damaged electronics and the groans of wounded aliens. King Kethran sat alone on his bone throne, facing the glowing human who had destroyed his personal army in less than 5 minutes. The ancient ruler tried one final gambit, activating a weapon built into his throne itself. The device was older than most civilizations, a relic from the early days of Vorthon expansion, when they had faced enemies that required extreme measures. It fired a beam of pure entropy that could unmake matter at the quantum level. The beam struck Taemin's center mass, and for a moment his golden glow flickered. Dr. Lee held her breath, thinking that the ancient weapon might finally be enough to stop him. But then the entropy beam began flowing backward, absorbed into his body and converted into something else entirely. King Kethran felt true despair for the first time in his 1,000-year reign. The human was not just immune. To his weapons, he was feeding on them, growing stronger with each attack. Everything the Vorthons had built, their entire technological superiority, was useless against this impossible being. Taemin began walking up the steps toward the throne, each footstep sending ripples through the electromagnetic fields that powered the ship. The ancient king raised his personal weapons, 4 different devices that had never failed him in centuries of conquest. All 4 fired at once. The combined energy was enough to crack a planet's crust, but it simply flowed around Taemin like water around a stone. His transformed body existed in a state that made such attacks meaningless. He was becoming something that operated on principles beyond Vorthon. Understanding, Dr. Lee watched as the 2 beings faced each other, the ancient alien king, who had terrorized the galaxy for a millennium, and the human marine who had been transformed by a week of impossible torture. The contrast was striking: age and experience versus youth and adaptability. King Kethran looked into Taemin's burning eyes and saw his own death reflected there. This was not just about revenge for the torture or justice for the dead Marines. This was about showing the entire galaxy that humanity was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The alien king tried to speak, to offer negotiations or terms of surrender, but Taemin was beyond such things now. His transformation had burned away everything except the core of what he was: a protector of humanity and a weapon against those who would harm his people. With movements too fast for normal eyes to follow, Taemin reached the throne. King Kethran raised his arms to defend himself, but his weapons fell silent, as if the universe itself had decided they were no longer needed. The ancient ruler felt hands close around his armored throat. For the first time in over 1,000 years, King Kethran knew what it felt like to be helpless in the face of superior power. The human who held his life in glowing hands was no longer entirely human, but something new, something that evolution had been preparing for since the species first looked up at the stars. The golden light around Taemin pulsed once with the rhythm of a human heartbeat, and the most feared ruler in galactic history simply ceased to exist. The throne room fell silent, except for the sound of ancient bones settling. As the weight of 1,000 years of tyranny lifted from the galaxy, Dr. Lee stared at the empty throne where moments before an empire had ended. She looked at Taemin standing amid the wreckage of Vorthon power, and realized that everything had changed. The balance of force in the galaxy had shifted in ways that would echo across the stars for generations. The transformation was complete, and the real consequences were just beginning. The silence in the torture chamber was complete for exactly 17 minutes and 32 seconds. Every instrument confirmed that the human was dead. His heart had stopped, his brain showed no activity, and the quantum scanners detected no life force at all. King Kethran had finally achieved victory over the most stubborn prisoner he had ever encountered. Then Taemin opened his eyes. The change was instant and terrifying. The human who had been strapped to the torture table for over a week was gone. In his place sat something that looked human but radiated power, that made the air around him glow with soft golden light. His eyes, no longer brown, now burned with flecks of fire that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. The energy, restraints that had held him motionless, simply dissolved when he moved. The quantum locks that could contain a small star flickered and died as if they had never existed. Taemin sat up slowly and looked around the chamber with new eyes that saw things no human had ever seen before. Dr. Lee So Young watched from her cell as the impossible happened before her scientific mind. The dead human was not only alive but transformed into something that her instruments couldn't properly measure. His body was generating energy fields that distorted the readings on every scanner in the room. The first Vorthon guard to react raised his energy rifle and fired a beam that could melt through battleship armor. The blast hit Taemin's center mass, and simply disappeared, absorbed into his body like water soaking into sand. His skin didn't even show a mark where the deadly energy had struck. Taman stood up from the table and took a step toward the guards. The movement was fluid and perfect, like a dancer or a predator. His bare feet made no sound on the metal floor, but each step sent ripples through the electromagnetic fields that powered the torture devices around the room. The second guard fired a full power burst from his weapon while activating a combat shield that could stop plasma cannons. Taman reached out with one hand and touched the energy shield. It sparked once, then shattered like glass. The guard behind it screamed as Taman's other hand closed around his throat. The alien was lifted off the ground with casual ease that showed impossible strength. The Vorthan weighed nearly 400 pounds and wore armor that could stop bullets, but Taman held him up with one arm like he was made of paper. The guard struggled and kicked but couldn't break free. King Kethran had seen enough. He activated the alarm system that would flood the chamber with security forces while preparing to retreat to his personal bunker. The ancient ruler had survived for over 1,000 years by knowing when to fight and when to run. This was definitely a time for running. Taman heard the alarms, but they sounded different now. His enhanced hearing could pick up frequencies that revealed the electronic patterns controlling the ship systems. He could hear the electromagnetic signatures of weapons charging and the quantum fluctuations of the ship's engines. The third guard tried to use a neural disruptor, the same type of weapon that had tortured Taman for days. The beam struck him in the head, and for a moment the golden glow around his body flickered, but instead of causing pain, the energy seemed to make him stronger. His eyes burned brighter, and his movements became even more fluid. Dr. Lee watched as more guards poured into the chamber carrying heavier weapons. Some had energy cannons that required 2 people to operate. Others brought devices she had never seen before that hummed with dangerous power. All of their most advanced technology was focused on stopping one human. Taman moved through them like they were standing still. His speed was beyond anything that should be possible, covering distance in ways that seemed to ignore the normal rules of physics. One moment he was across the room. Next, he was behind a group of guards who hadn't even seen him move. Their armor that could stop starship weapons crumpled under his hands like aluminum foil. Energy shields designed to deflect asteroid impacts flickered and died when he touched them. The guards' weapons fired continuously, but the energy beams either missed completely or were absorbed into his glowing form. The battle moved out of the torture chamber and into the corridors of the massive ship. Taman fought his way through wave after wave of Vorthan soldiers, learning their tactics and weaknesses with each encounter. His enhanced mind processed information at impossible speeds, turning combat into a kind of deadly mathematics. Behind him, Dr. Lee managed to escape from her cell when the energy locks failed during the fighting. She followed the path of destruction that Taman was leaving behind, trying to understand what had happened to her fellow human. The scientific part of her mind was recording everything, even as her survival instincts screamed at her to find an escape pod. The Vorthan soldiers were calling for backup and reinforcements, but nothing they brought could slow down the transformed human heavy combat robots that could level buildings were torn apart with his bare hands. Energy barriers that could contain nuclear explosions were walked through like they weren't there. King Kethran watched the battle through security cameras as he retreated deeper into his flagship. The human was moving through his forces like a natural disaster, destroying everything in his path, but doing it with a precision that showed intelligence and planning. This wasn't mindless rage. This was controlled fury directed by a mind that had transcended normal limitations. The ship's systems began failing as Taman fought his way through the corridors. His presence seemed to disrupt the quantum fields that powered Vorthan technology. Lights flickered, gravity generators stuttered, and the environmental systems struggled to maintain atmosphere around him. Dr. Lee realized that Taman's transformation was continuing even as he fought. His body was adapting to Vorthan weapons and technology in real time, making him immune to things that should have been able to stop him. The torture had awakened something in human genetics that had been sleeping for millions of years. The battle reached the ship's command center, where the most elite Vorthan guards made their last stand. These were veterans of 100 conquests, wearing the finest armor and carrying weapons that could crack planets. Their commander was General Vex Tar, the same alien who had led the ambush that killed Tay Mins. Squad Vex Tar recognized the human immediately, despite his transformation. This was the same Marine who had been captured on Kepler, the one whose squad had fought so bravely before being overwhelmed. But the creature standing before him now was something far more dangerous than any human soldier. The general raised his personal weapon, a gravity manipulator that could crush targets by increasing their weight by thousands of times. The beam hit Tai Min, and for a moment he slowed down as if moving through thick liquid. But then his body adapted even to this learning, to exist outside normal gravity fields. Tai Min reached Vex Tar in 3 impossible strides that seemed to fold space around him. His hand closed around the general's armored head and lifted him off the ground. The alien struggled and fired his weapon directly into Tai Min's chest, but the energy simply made his eyes glow brighter. For a moment they looked at each other, the transformed human and the alien who had killed his friends. Vex Tar saw something in those burning eyes that made him understand the magnitude of what they had awakened. This wasn't just about revenge, this was about showing the galaxy that humans were far more than they appeared. The general tried to speak, to ask for mercy or to negotiate, but Tai Min wasn't interested in conversation. His friends were dead, his squad was gone, and these creatures were responsible. There was only one way this could end, with a sound like breaking stone. Vex Tar's armor crumpled. The alien who had terrorized human colonies and led countless raids fell, silent. The other guards in the command center looked at each other, and then at the glowing human who had just killed their leader with his bare hands. One by one they dropped their weapons and backed away. Some tried to run but found that their legs wouldn't carry them fast enough. Tai Min let them go. He wasn't interested in slaughter. He was interested in reaching the one who had ordered his torture. Dr. Lee caught up to him at the command center and saw the destruction he had left behind. But she also noticed something else in his movements. Despite his incredible power and the obvious rage driving him forward, he was still, fundamentally, Tai Min. Still the Marine who had fought to protect his squad. She called his name, and he turned to look at her. The burning eyes softened for a moment, and she saw recognition there. He was still human underneath the transformation, still the person who had endured a week of torture. Rather than betray his fellow soldiers, together, they moved toward the throne room where King Kethran waited. The ancient ruler had one more surprise waiting for them, but he was beginning to understand that all the weapons in his arsenal might not be enough to stop what he had created. The final confrontation was about to begin. The 7th day began with King Kethran bringing out devices that his own scientists feared to touch. These were weapons from the darkest corners of Vorthan technology, things that had been banned from use even against their worst enemies. The ancient king had decided that if normal torture couldn't break the human, then he would use methods that could unmake life itself. Tai Min was strapped to a new table made from some kind of metal that seemed to absorb light. The energy bonds holding him were different too. These ones hummed with power that made his bones ache just being near them. His body had been changing for days now, healing faster than should be possible, but even he wasn't sure how much more he could take. The first device they used was called a cellular disruptor. It sent waves of energy through his body that tried to tear apart the bonds between atoms. Tai Min felt his molecules being pulled in different directions, as if his entire body was trying to come apart. At once the pain was beyond description, like being burned from the inside out. But his body adapted even to this. The waves of destructive energy somehow became fuel for his healing process. His cells learned to absorb the disruptor beams and use them to rebuild themselves stronger than before. The Vorthan scientists watched their instruments in amazement as their prisoner became more resistant to their deadliest weapon, Dr. Lee. So Young was forced to watch from her cell as the torture reached levels that should have been impossible to survive. She had studied human biology for years, and what she was seeing broke every law of science she knew. Tai Min's cellular structure was rewriting itself in real time, becoming something that had never existed before. The second device was a neural shredder designed to destroy the connections in a victim's brain while keeping them conscious. It sent tendrils of energy into Tai Min's skull that felt like liquid fire flowing through his thoughts. His Memories became confused and scattered as the alien technology tried to tear apart his mind. For hours, his consciousness flickered in and out of existence. He saw flashes of his childhood on Earth, his training as a Marine, the faces of his dead squad mates. But somehow his brain began building new pathways around the damage, creating connections that were faster and more efficient than before. King Kethran watched with growing frustration as his most advanced torture devices failed to break the human. The medical scanners showed that instead of destroying their prisoner, they were somehow making him stronger. His healing factor had evolved beyond anything in Vorthan records. The third device was something that even the king's own guards refused to operate. It was called a quantum ripper, and it worked by tearing holes in the fabric of space-time itself around the victim. The pain from having reality itself torn apart around you was supposed to drive any creature instantly insane. Taimin felt the universe bending and twisting around him as the quantum ripper activated. Parts of his body existed in different dimensions while other parts remained in normal space. The sensation was like being stretched across multiple realities at once while still remaining conscious of all of them. His brain should have shattered under the strain of existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. But instead, it began processing information from all the different realities, creating a kind of multidimensional awareness that let him see patterns and connections that shouldn't be visible. The Vorthan scientists were recording everything, but their instruments couldn't explain what was happening. The human was surviving technologies that could destroy planets. His body was adapting to forces that warped the basic laws of physics. The impossible was becoming routine. By the end of the day, Taimin's transformation had accelerated beyond all measurement. His heart was beating in rhythms that followed mathematical patterns found in the structure of galaxies. His brain was operating on frequencies that let him hear the background radiation of the universe itself. Dr. Lee realized with growing horror that the Vorthans had no idea what they had created. The torture was triggering some kind of evolutionary leap that was turning Taimin into something that was no longer entirely human. His DNA was rewriting itself, using principles of physics that hadn't been discovered yet. King Kethran was becoming desperate. The human had now survived 7 days of torture that should have killed him in the first hour. Every weapon in the Vorthan arsenal had failed to break his spirit or even slow down his adaptation process. The ancient king was facing something that challenged everything he thought he knew about life and death. The 8th day brought out the forbidden weapons technologies that the Vorthans had locked away because they were too dangerous, even for a species that conquered galaxies. These devices didn't just kill, they erased their victims from existence, making it as if they had never been born. The existence eraser was a weapon that deleted matter from reality by convincing the universe that it had never existed in the first place. When activated around Taimin, it should have made him simply disappear, leaving behind not even empty space but a reality where he had never been created. Instead, something unprecedented happened. Taimin's body began absorbing the erasure energy and using it to strengthen his own existence. He became more real, not less, as if the weapon was having the opposite of its intended effect. The laws of causality themselves seemed to bend around him. The Vorthan scientists panicked as their instruments showed readings that were physically impossible. The human was becoming so fundamentally real that his existence was starting to affect the space-time around him. Gravity was bending toward him. Light was changing color when it passed near his body. King Kethran realized that he had made a terrible mistake. The torture had awakened something in the human that was beyond his understanding or control. This was no longer about breaking a prisoner or extracting information. This had become about survival, because whatever the human was becoming might be powerful enough to destroy them all. The final weapon was brought out with trembling hands. It was called the Life Ender, and it worked by severing the connection between a soul and the universe itself. This was death in its most absolute form, not just the stopping of biological functions, but the complete separation of consciousness from reality. As they prepared the weapon, Taimin felt his body making one final adaptation. His cells were now operating on principles that existed outside normal physics. His consciousness had expanded beyond the boundaries of his physical brain, spreading into the quantum foam that underlied all reality. Dr. Lee watched through her cell window as the aliens activated their ultimate weapon. She saw the energy beam hit Taemin and watched as all signs of life disappeared from the monitors. His heart stopped. His brain went silent. His cellular activity ceased. For the first time in 8 days, the torture chamber was completely quiet. King Kethran looked at the lifeless body on the table and felt a mixture of satisfaction and relief. The human was finally dead, killed by a weapon that could end any form of life in the universe. The threat was over, and the ancient king had proven once again that nothing could resist his will. The medical scanners confirmed what their eyes could see. The human was completely dead, with no electrical activity in his brain and no cellular functions anywhere in his body. The life ender had worked perfectly, separating his consciousness from his physical form and sending it into the void between realities. For 17 minutes and 32 seconds, according to the ship's chronometer, Staff Sergeant Kim Taemin was clinically dead. His body showed no signs of life, and the quantum scanners detected no consciousness connected to his physical form. The king declared victory and ordered the body prepared for disposal. The guards began unlocking the restraints that had held the prisoner for over a week. They moved efficiently, having performed this task countless times before with the bodies of other failed prisoners. The torture chamber was cleaned and prepared for the next victim. Dr. Lee watched sadly as they prepared to remove her fellow human's body. She had hoped that his incredible resistance might lead to rescue or escape, but the final weapon had been too much even for his amazing healing abilities. Another good person had died at the hands of these monsters, but as the guards reached for the body, something impossible happened. Taemin's eyes opened. Not the slow flutter of someone regaining consciousness, but the sharp, sudden awareness of someone who had never been unconscious at all. The energy restraints that had held him for days simply fell away as if they had lost all power. The guards stepped backward in shock and fear. The human sat up on the table and looked around the room with eyes that now glowed. With their own inner light, his body was radiating energy that made the air shimmer with heat waves. The impossible had happened again. He had returned from absolute death. King Kethran felt true fear for the first time in over 1,000 years. The human hadn't just survived the life ender. He had somehow used it to complete his transformation into something that existed beyond the normal laws of life and death. Whatever was looking at him through those glowing eyes was no longer entirely human. Taemin stood up from the torture table and flexed his hands. The guards raised their weapons, but he moved faster than they could track. Their energy beams passed through empty air as he appeared behind them, moving with speed that defied physics. The real battle was about to begin. The massive Vorthan flagship was like a floating city in space. Taemin was dragged through corridors that seemed to stretch forever past rooms filled with alien technology and weapons. The walls were covered in what looked like trophies, bones, and artifacts from dozens of different species that the Vorthans had conquered over the centuries. His guards were different from the ones who had captured him. These wore black armor with red symbols and moved with the discipline of elite soldiers. They didn't speak to each other or to him, but Taemin could feel their eyes watching his every movement through their helmet visors. The healing process in his body was still continuing, but now it felt different, stronger somehow. The energy ropes around his arms should have been cutting off his circulation, but his hands weren't even getting numb. His heartbeat had settled into a rhythm that felt more powerful than before, like an engine running at higher capacity. They passed through several security checkpoints where massive doors scanned the guards and their prisoner. Each door was thicker than the last and covered in warning symbols that didn't need translation. The deeper they went into the ship, the more dangerous everything felt. The air itself seemed heavier with the weight of ancient authority. Finally, they reached a set of doors that were clearly special. These were covered in gold and carved with images of battles and conquests. The guards stopped and one of them activated a communication device on his armor. Clicking sounds came back through the device and the doors slowly opened. The throne room was enormous and terrible. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above while the floor was covered in bones from creatures Taemin had never seen before. Weapons and armor from defeated enemies hung on the walls like art. In the center of it all sat a throne made from what looked like the skull of some massive space creature. King Kethran was even more imposing than the other Vorthons. He was ancient by any standard, with scars covering his armor and 6 eyes that glowed with their own light. His 4 arms each held different weapons, and his claws were longer than human fingers. When he spoke, his voice was like grinding stone. The guards forced Taemin to his knees in front of the throne, but he kept his head up and looked directly at the alien king. Kethran seemed amused by this show of defiance. His 6 eyes studied the human, like a scientist examining an interesting specimen under a microscope. The interrogation began immediately. Kethran spoke in perfect English, which surprised Taemin. The alien king had clearly studied human languages and cultures as part of his conquest plans. He wanted to know about Earth military bases, the locations of human colonies, and the secrets of faster-than-light travel. Taemin gave only his name, rank, and service number, just like his training had taught him. This seemed to amuse the king even more. Kethran had broken countless prisoners from dozens of species over his 1,000-year reign. One stubborn human was hardly a challenge worth his personal attention, but something about Taemin's defiance intrigued the ancient ruler. Instead of handing him over to interrogation specialists, Kethran decided to handle this personally. He had devices brought into the throne room that looked like they belonged in a nightmare laboratory of pain and suffering. The first torture device sent electric shocks through Taemin's nervous system that should have knocked him unconscious. The pain was incredible, but he managed to stay awake and aware. When it was over, his body had already started healing the damage to his nerves and muscles. Kethran noticed this unusual recovery and ordered his medical technicians to scan the prisoner. Their instruments showed cellular regeneration happening at rates that should have been impossible for any known species. The king became more interested in his captive. With each passing hour, they tried different approaches. Neural probes that invaded his mind and tried to extract memories by force. Taemin felt the alien technology digging through his thoughts, but somehow his brain seemed to be adapting, building walls around the information they wanted. His memories of military secrets became fuzzy and distant. Even to him, chemical torture came next. Vorthon scientists injected him with toxins that were designed to cause maximum pain while keeping the victim conscious. The poisons burned through his bloodstream like acid, but within hours his body had somehow neutralized them and begun repairing the damage. The king was fascinated. He had never seen a species with such adaptive capabilities. Most creatures broke under the first round of torture, but this human seemed to be getting stronger. The medical readings showed impossible things happening at the cellular level. Dr. Lee So-young watched from her own cell nearby. She had been captured during the initial attack on the human colony and had been forced to witness the interrogation. The xenobiologist in her was amazed by what she was seeing. Taemin's body was evolving in real time, adapting to each new form of torture. She tried to get the attention of the Vorthon scientists to warn them that they were dealing with something unprecedented, but they dismissed her as a primitive human who couldn't possibly understand their advanced torture methods. They were making a terrible mistake. Days passed. In the torture chamber, Kethran became obsessed with breaking his prisoner. Each failed attempt only made him more determined. The ancient king had never met anyone who could resist his methods for so long. His pride was being challenged by a single human soldier. Taemin's body continued changing in ways that defied science. His bones became denser, his muscles more efficient, his nervous system faster at processing pain and adapting to it. The torture was literally making him stronger, which should have been impossible. The other prisoners in nearby cells could hear the sounds coming from the throne room. Human screams mixed with alien clicking and the hum of terrible machines. But somehow the screaming never stopped completely, which meant the human was still alive, still fighting. Captain Park Ji-ho was still searching for his missing Marines aboard the USS Incheon. The ship had detected the energy signatures of the Vorthon flagship, but it was too heavily defended for a direct assault. Intelligence Officer Commander Choi Min-ho was working around the clock, trying to find a weakness in their defenses. None of them knew what was happening to their fellow Marine inside the enemy ship. They had no idea that Taemin was undergoing a transformation that would change everything they thought they knew about human potential. His body was being pushed beyond all known limits. By the end of the 6th day, even Keithran was becoming frustrated. This one human had resisted tortures that had broken the strongest warriors from across the galaxy. The medical scan showed that instead of weakening, his prisoner was actually becoming more resilient with each session. Something was happening that the ancient king didn't understand. The human healing factor was accelerating beyond anything in Vorton records. His cellular structure was reorganizing itself in ways that their science couldn't explain. It was as if torture was triggering some kind of evolutionary leap. The king decided to increase the intensity of the torture sessions. If normal methods couldn't break this human, then he would use techniques that were forbidden even by Vorthon standards. Devices that could rewrite a victim's DNA and weapons that could tear apart the fabric of space-time itself. Dr. Lee So-young watched in growing horror as the torture escalated beyond anything she had ever imagined. The Vorthons were using technology that could unmake matter at the atomic level. Yet somehow Tae-min continued to survive and adapt. His body was becoming something that shouldn't exist. On the 7th day, Kethran made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. If he couldn't break this human through torture, then he would simply end the experiment. The king had grown tired of the challenge and decided that death would be his final victory. The preparation for the final torture session began with devices being brought in that even the Vorthon guards seemed afraid to handle. These were weapons of absolute destruction designed to end life in the most complete way possible. Not just death, but the complete erasure of everything that made something alive. Taemin felt his body continuing to change as the aliens prepared their ultimate weapon. His healing factor was now working so fast that cuts closed before they finished forming. His heart rate had stabilized at a level that should have killed him, but instead made him feel more alive than ever. The ancient king looked down at his prisoner with something like respect. This human had lasted longer than any other creature he had tortured in 1,000 years of conquest. But even the strongest will had limits, and Kethran was about to find those limits. What neither the king nor his scientists understood was that they had pushed Taemin's body past the point of normal evolution. Something new was being born in that torture chamber. Something that had never existed before in the history of the galaxy. The final session was about to begin. Taemin crouched behind the rocky outcrop and checked his rifle one more time. The alien planet Kepler was nothing like Earth, with its purple sky and strange orange grass that moved without wind. His squad had been patrolling this area for 3 weeks now, looking for signs of the Vorthon Empire forces that had been attacking human colonies. The other Marines in his unit always said Taemin was lucky. He had been in more firefights than anyone else, but somehow always walked away with barely a scratch. They joked that bullets seemed to bend around him and explosions never quite reached where he was standing. Taemin never told them the truth about why he healed so fast from cuts and bruises. He didn't understand it himself. Corporal Kim Dongho was scanning the horizon with his binoculars when he suddenly froze. His hand went up in the silent signal for enemy contact. Taemin felt his heart start beating faster as he looked through his scope at the ridge ahead. 8 massive alien figures were moving between the rocks, carrying weapons that glowed with blue energy. The Vorthons were huge creatures standing nearly 8 feet tall with thick armor that looked like it was part of their bodies. They had 4 arms, each ending in claws that could cut through steel. Their faces were hidden behind helmets, but Taemin had seen pictures of their insect-like features with multiple eyes and razor-sharp teeth. Sergeant Park Min-soo gave hand signals for the squad to spread out and take cover. They were only 5 Marines against 8 aliens, but they had fought worse odds before Taemin moved quietly to his assigned position, feeling the familiar calm that came over him before a battle. His body always seemed to know what to do even when his mind was racing. The first shots came without warning. Blue energy beams lit up the rocks around them, and Taemin heard Dongho scream as one of the alien weapons hit him square in the chest. The smell of burned flesh filled the air as his friend fell backward and didn't get up again. Rage filled Taemin's chest as he returned fire with his rifle. The battle was chaos. Alien weapons made no sound except for the sizzle when they hit rock or flesh. Human bullets made loud cracks as they bounced off Vorthon armor. The aliens moved fast despite their size, jumping from rock to rock like giant spiders. Taemin managed to hit one in the leg, but its armor absorbed most of the damage. Private Lee J. Sung was next to fall, when two aliens flanked his position. His screams echoed across the rocks before going silent. Tae Min tried to reach him, but more energy beams forced him back behind cover. His rifle was getting hot from continuous firing, and he was down to his last. Magazine Sergeant Park was shouting orders, but his voice was cut off by a terrible wet sound. When Tae Min looked over, he saw his squad leader on the ground with alien claws through his chest. The Vorthon standing over him made a sound that might have been laughter before moving toward Private Cho Sang-min. Tae Min watched in horror as his last remaining squad mate tried to run. The alien caught him easily, lifting Sang-min off the ground with one massive hand. Tae Min could hear bones breaking as the creature squeezed. The young Marine stopped moving and the alien tossed his body aside like garbage. Now Tae Min was alone, facing 4 remaining Vorthons. His rifle clicked empty and he reached for his sidearm, knowing it wouldn't do much good against their armor. The aliens seemed to realize the fight was over because they started walking toward him instead of running. Something strange was happening to Tae Min's body. The cuts on his arms from flying rock fragments were closing up. The burn on his shoulder from a near miss was already starting to heal. He had always healed fast, but never like this. It was as if the stress and danger were making his body work overtime. The largest Vorthon reached him first. Its claws knocked the pistol from his hands and wrapped around his throat. Tae Min felt himself being lifted off the ground as the alien examined him with its multiple eyes. It made clicking sounds that might have been speech to the others through his fading vision. Tae Min saw more aliens arriving. These ones wore different armor with symbols that meant they were higher ranking. The big one holding him made more clicking sounds, and the newcomers clicked back. In what was clearly a conversation Tae Min didn't understand the words, but he could tell they were discussing what to do with him. The alien holding him loosened its grip enough for Tae Min to breathe. The others were pointing at the human bodies scattered around the rocks and making sounds that seemed pleased. They had won this battle easily, and now they had a prisoner to question. Tae Min felt his body continuing to heal even as rough alien hands bound his arms with some kind of energy rope that glowed and felt warm against his skin. The wounds from the battle were closing so fast he could actually feel his skin moving. The aliens didn't seem to notice. They were too busy examining human weapons and equipment. A new sound filled the air as a Vorthon transport ship descended from the purple sky. It was massive and black with strange curves that hurt to look at directly. The ship landed nearby and more aliens emerged. These ones moved differently with an authority that made the others step back respectfully. One of the new arrivals was clearly in command. It was even larger than the others with golden symbols on its armor. When it spoke, the other aliens immediately started loading Tae Min onto the ship along with the bodies of his squad mates and various human equipment as they dragged him up the ramp into the alien ship. Tae Min noticed that the burns and cuts on his body were completely gone. His uniform was still torn and bloody, but underneath the skin was perfect. His enhanced healing was working faster than ever before. Almost like his body was preparing for something terrible. The inside of the ship was dark and filled with strange smells. The aliens secured him in what was clearly a prison cell with walls that seemed to absorb light. The energy rope around his arms tightened automatically when he tried to move and sent painful shocks through his body. Through a small window, Tae Min could see the rocky landscape of Kepler falling away as the ship lifted off. He thought about his dead squad mates and wondered if Captain Park Ji-ho back on the human ship would even know what happened to them. The mission was supposed to be routine patrol. Nothing routine about alien torture ships, as the transport docked with something much larger in space. Tae Min felt his body continuing to change in subtle ways. His heart was beating stronger. His vision seemed sharper. His hearing picked up sounds that should have been too quiet to notice. It was as if every cell in his body was getting ready for a fight. The cell door opened, and more aliens entered. These ones had different equipment, including devices that looked medical or scientific. They began scanning him with instruments that hummed and beeped. Tae Min didn't resist, knowing it would only make things worse for now. One of the aliens made excited clicking sounds as it looked at its scanner. The others gathered around to see what it had found. They were clearly surprised by whatever the device was telling them about his biology. None of them had ever seen a human who could heal like he could. The ship was moving again. heading toward something even larger in the darkness of space. Through the window, Taimin could see lights in the distance forming the shape of a massive vessel bigger than anything humans had ever built. He realized with growing dread that he was being taken to meet someone very important in the Vordan Empire. His body continued preparing itself for whatever was coming next.